My friends, every sincere seeker on this path eventually comes to a moment when they look toward the heavens and say, "Father, why do you not answer me?" It is a tender moment, an honest moment, a moment in which the heart feels its own longing more deeply than ever before. You have prayed, you have waited, you have searched the scriptures, you have knelt in earnest devotion, and still there comes a time when God seems silent, and so you ask, not out of rebellion, but out of deep yearning, where is the presence? Why do I not hear? Why does the voice of spirit appear hidden behind a veil I cannot lift? Let us pause with that question. Let us sit gently before it. For the silence you believe belongs to God is not God's silence at all. The infinite cannot withhold itself. The omnipresence cannot absent itself. The living presence that is the very life of your consciousness never sleeps, never withdraws, never turns away. What feels like divine silence is not heavenly indifference. It is simply that the mind of man has not yet learned how to listen to that which speaks without words. You see, we have been trained to look outward. We have been conditioned to expect God to speak as mortals speak, to answer as persons answer, to respond with noise, movement, and form. And in this expectation, we forget a profound truth. The kingdom of God does not speak through the senses. It reveals itself in the depth of your own stillness. It whispers in the invisible sanctuary of your being. It unfolds in the quiet recognition that the presence you seek is closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. So let us begin together by acknowledging this simple, liberating principle. God is not silent. God is not absent. God is not withholding a word from you. The silence you experience is merely the turbulence of the personal mind, the noise of desire, fear, expectation, and the incessant reaching outward for what can only be found within. When that noise quiets, when the mind ceases its efforts to obtain something from God, when the heart enters a receptive stillness, then, my friends, the silence becomes the voice. Throughout this teaching, we will explore why this apparent silence arises, and more importantly, how to dissolve it not by trying to make God speak, but by awakening to the truth that the voice of spirit is always, always present. And if you will stay with me, if you will listen not with the intellect but with the inner ear, you will begin to discover that what you once called God's silence is actually God's steady, unbroken companionship waiting for your recognition. Now, let us move deeper into this inquiry. Before we can understand why God never truly falls silent, we must first examine the very foundation of our seeking. For nearly all spiritual frustration arises from one central misconception, the belief in a God who exists somewhere else, a God who must be reached, a God who must be summoned, a God who must be persuaded to act on our behalf. This, my friends, is perhaps the greatest illusion in religious thought. It is the false concept that has kept humanity wandering in spiritual deserts for centuries. When you conceive of God as someone or something existing apart from your own consciousness, you immediately place yourself at a distance from the very source of your being. And from that imagined distance, you begin the long, weary process of trying to close a gap that does not exist. You pray upward, outward, beyond. You look for signs and wonders in the sky. You wait for messages from on high. Yet all the while, the divine whisper remains where it has always been within you, not buried, not hidden, but present as the infinite life which animates your breath, your awareness, your very existence. The problem is not that God is far away, but that we have been taught to search in the wrong direction. You see, the moment you imagine God as external, you create in your own consciousness a sense of separation, and that sense of separation becomes the very barrier through which the voice of spirit seems unable to penetrate. But the barrier is not real. It is only a belief, a habit of consciousness formed over lifetimes, a belief inherited from theology, tradition, and human reasoning. Joel Goldsmith spoke often of this fundamental error, imagining a God who must travel to reach you, a God who must decide whether to bless or refuse you, a God who answers sometimes and remains silent at other times. Such a God would not be God. That would be a limited being, subject to moods, whims, and conditions. The infinite cannot be sometimes present and sometimes absent. The eternal cannot be near one moment and distant the next. The all-presence cannot retreat or return. There is no separation. There never has been. The separation exists only in the human concept of God. God is not a far-off deity to be petitioned. God is the essence of your own consciousness, the light that shines not upon you, but as you, the presence that does not enter your life, but is your life. And until this inner truth begins to dawn, until you realize that the place where you stand is holy because the presence is there, your prayers will always feel like they are traveling across a great chasm, waiting for an answer that never seems to come. But once this illusion is corrected, once you begin to understand that the kingdom of God is not a distant realm, but the ground of your being, everything changes. Prayer changes, listening changes, your whole spiritual practice becomes transformed. For you are no longer seeking a God who must speak, you are awakening to a God who is already speaking, already present, already expressing, already living through you. Let us now continue, for this understanding forms the foundation for all that follows. When the concept of a distant God dissolves, the seeming silence of God dissolves with it. As we continue, let us look honestly at the experience we call God's silence. For once we understand that God is not distant, that God is not withholding or absent, we must ask, what then creates the sense of separation? What blocks the awareness of the ever-present voice? The answer, beloved friends, is far simpler and far more subtle than most imagine. The silence you believe comes from God is, in reality, the noise of the human mind. The mind, restless, reaching, grasping, fearing, desiring, is so full of its own activity that the gentle whisper of spirit cannot be recognized. God is not silent. Thought is loud. It is this noise, this ceaseless inner movement that drowns out the still small voice. For the voice of God does not compete with human thought. It does not shout to be heard above the clamor. It does not push its way into consciousness. Spirit speaks from the depths, not the surface. And so long as the surface is disturbed, the depths remain unnoticed. Consider your prayers. So often they are filled with pleading, God help me, God show me, God fix this, God, why don't you answer? But every one of these prayers, however sincere, carries within it a hidden assumption, the belief that you lack something and that God must supply it. And in that belief lies the root of separation, a prayer born of fear, of urgency, of longing, is the prayer of a mind not yet still. It is the prayer of a consciousness that has forgotten its own divine completeness Joel Goldsmith taught that begging God for intervention is like shouting across a stormy sea. The very effort, the very anxiety, creates more waves, and when the waters are stirred, the reflection of truth becomes distorted. But when the waters are calm, when thought grows quiet, truth reflects itself effortlessly. This inner noise takes many forms. It may be the constant rehearsal of problems, the mind endlessly asking, "What will happen to me?" It may be the fear of lack, the worry of tomorrow, the effort to control or manipulate outer conditions. It may even be spiritual striving, the attempt to force an experience of God through willpower, effort, or intensity. All of this is noise. And in the midst of this noise, we say, "Why is God silent?" But it is not God who is silent. It is we who are loud. When the mind is filled with its own activity, there is no room for the gentle movement of the spirit. The presence does not interrupt. The presence does not argue. The presence awaits recognition. And the moment the mental noise softens, even slightly, the movement of God becomes perceptible, not as a dramatic event, but as peace, as clarity, as an inner knowing that needs no words. So let us understand this clearly. God's silence is an illusion, created by the turbulence of personal thought. God's voice is constant, quiet, ever present, needing only the opening of consciousness to be heard. When we release our frantic prayers, when we stop trying to make God speak, when we cease asking for signs and begin resting in trust, then, without effort, the divine message emerges not through the senses, but through the inner awareness that arises from stillness. And it is to this stillness that we now turn. And now, as we turn inward more deeply, we come to one of the most essential truths in all spiritual practice. God is heard only in stillness, not the stillness of inactivity, not the stillness of sitting motionless, but the stillness of consciousness, that deep, unhurried quiet in which the turbulence of the mind subsides and the soul becomes receptive to the presence that is forever speaking. The voice of spirit is not loud. It will not overpower the senses. It does not push its way into awareness. The divine message is not a thunderous proclamation. Rather, it is a gentle unveiling, a soft inner movement, a quiet dawning of truth that appears in the silence between thoughts. It comes not because we demand it, but because we become still enough to notice what has always been. Joel Goldsmith often spoke of entering the secret place of the Most High, and he did not refer to a physical location. He spoke of a dimension of consciousness, an atmosphere of awareness, where the personal mind grows silent and the infinite reveals itself. This stillness is not something we create, it is something we allow. We do not achieve it through effort. We slip into it by relinquishing effort. You may have noticed that when you are anxious, when you are striving for answers, when you are mentally wrestling with a problem, the harder you think, the farther the solution seems to drift. Yet when you pause, when you breathe, when you momentarily release the compulsion to solve, a subtle clarity begins to rise on its own. This is not personal thinking. This is the activity of the spirit becoming visible as inspiration. Stillness is the doorway through which the infinite enters conscious awareness. In stillness, the mind ceases to impose its own will. In stillness, the heart stops pleading for a particular outcome. In stillness, the personal sense of "I must make something happen" dissolves. And in that sacred pause, in that inner quiet, the presence begins to reveal itself, not as a voice speaking sentences, but as peace. It may come as a deep breath that you did not consciously take. It may come as a sudden release of tension in the chest. It may come as a sense of lightness, an unexplainable calm, a quiet confidence that does not originate from human reasoning. This, my friends, is the voice of God. For God is not heard in words. God is heard in peace. God is heard in clarity. God is heard in the transparency of consciousness. When personal thought grows still, you do not enter this stillness by force. You do not wrestle the mind into silence. You simply become aware of the presence of a deeper life within you, a presence that waits patiently for your recognition. And when recognition dawns even faintly, the silence you once feared becomes the very place where God speaks most clearly. Let us understand that stillness is not the absence of thought, but the absence of resistance. It is the moment when we stop pushing, stop grasping, stop asking, and begin allowing. In that allowing, the divine impulse emerges naturally, irresistibly, quietly. We now begin to see that God was never silent. It is only in stillness that the truth of this becomes unmistakably clear. And now, having entered the atmosphere of stillness, let us consider the next movement of spiritual realization, which Joel Goldsmith called the art of inner receptivity. Stillness prepares the ground, but receptivity invites the seed of truth to take root. Stillness quiets the mind. Receptivity opens the heart, and without both, we cannot hear the gentle movement of the Spirit within us. Receptivity, my friends, is not a technique. It is not something to be mastered through practice or repetition. It is a posture of consciousness, an inner stance in which we release every trace of striving and become simply open, available, responsive to the presence that is forever seeking to reveal itself. Most prayers are attempts to reach God, but receptivity is the sacred willingness to be reached. It is the inward relaxation that says, "Speak, Lord, thy servant listens." Not tell me what I want to hear, not give me what I desire, not fix this situation, but a quiet, humble, unconditioned listening that expects nothing and welcomes everything that flows from Spirit, Joel Goldsmith would say. Do not pray for things, pray for light. That light does not come through the manipulation of thought. It comes through receptivity, through the recognition that the infinite is already present, already complete, and needs only your openness to reveal its fullness. What does this receptivity feel like? It feels like an unclenching of the soul. It feels like the loosening of the inner fist that is held tightly to fear, desire, and control. It feels like resting in the assurance that all good flows from within, not from without. It feels like surrender, not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of effort in receptivity. We release every demand we have placed upon God. We release every expectation of how our prayer should be answered. We release every fear that urges us to force an outcome. In this releasing, we make space. And into that space, the divine impulse flows, not dramatically, not forcefully, but with the unmistakable gentleness of truth that is self-evident the moment it appears. Receptivity is the letting go of personal will. Receptivity is the willingness to be taught by the Spirit. Receptivity is the capacity to receive what the mind could never imagine on its own. And so, instead of asking God for solutions, we become receptive to the inner realization that reveals solutions without struggle. Instead of pleading for guidance, we open to the subtle intuition that carries guidance within it. Instead of begging for peace, we rest in the recognition that peace is our natural state, awaiting our acknowledgement. This is the art of receptivity, to become still enough to hear, open enough to receive, and humble enough to allow Spirit to reveal truth in its own way and its own time. When consciousness takes this shape, when we cease trying to direct the infinite and begin allowing the infinite to direct us, the illusion of God's silence dissolves, for the voice of truth is forever speaking, forever moving, forever illuminating. It requires only that we become receptive enough to notice its eternal activity within our own being. Now, my friends, it is one thing to speak of stillness and receptivity when life is calm and when the days unfold with a certain ease and the heart is not heavily burdened. But let us be honest with one another. It is during life's darkest moments that the silence of God seems most unbearable. When illness strikes the body, when financial uncertainty rises like a storm, when a relationship breaks, when grief stands uninvited at the doorway of your life, these are the moments when you reach most earnestly for God. And these are often the very moments in which you feel that God does not answer. Let us explore this tender, difficult territory with compassion. When crisis appears, the mind becomes agitated. Fear floods into consciousness like a rapid current. The heart reaches outward for divine intervention, for relief, for assurance, for a sign that all will be well. And when no immediate answer comes, when the heavens seem unmoved, we feel abandoned, unheard, forsaken. But listen carefully. It is not that God has withdrawn. It is not that God has chosen to remain silent in your hour of need. What you are experiencing is the intensity of your own fear drowning out the quiet movement of Spirit. Joel Goldsmith often said that the greatest challenge for the seeker is not the crisis itself, but the belief that crisis has power. For the moment you fear a condition, you elevate that condition to the status of a second power, one capable of overshadowing God's presence, and in that belief, fear expands, thought becomes turbulent, and the inner doorway to stillness narrows. It is this turbulence, not divine silence, that obscures the gentle movement of Spirit. Understand this truth. Crisis does not silence God. Crisis only amplifies the noise of the human mind, and when the mind is noisy, the whisper of Spirit cannot be heard. So what do we do in crisis? We do not deny our humanity. We do not pretend that pain is pleasant or that fear is easy to release. We do not condemn ourselves for trembling, but we learn to hold two truths at once. The material circumstance is real to the senses. The spiritual reality is deeper, more enduring, and untouched by appearances. This dual awareness, difficult though it may seem, is the foundation of spiritual maturity. You may be facing a medical diagnosis. On the human level, you address it with wisdom, care, and whatever practical steps are called for, but within your consciousness, you quietly, gently, persistently recognize that your true being, the life which animates you, is whole, eternal, and unharmed. You do not deny the condition, you deny its power to separate you from the presence. You may be facing financial uncertainty. On the human level, you make prudent adjustments, seek counsel, and act responsibly. But in the deeper sanctuary of your awareness, you rest in the truth That supply does not come from the world, it flows from the infinite source within your own consciousness. You do not deny the bills. You deny the belief that your good is external. You may be enduring the loss of someone you love. You grieve honestly. You feel the ache of the heart, and you honor the human experience of sorrow. But beneath the grief, you hold to the understanding that life is indestructible, eternal, forever flowing, that spirit does not end, and therefore nothing real is ever truly lost. You do not deny your tears. You deny the belief that death has triumphed over life. In each of these, God is not silent. Your grief, your fear, your despair are simply louder than the whisper of the presence. But as you breathe, as you soften, as you acknowledge spirit even faintly, the noise begins to quiet. And into that quiet, the gentle tide of divine peace enters, not as an escape from the crisis, but as a deeper strength within it. The presence does not always change the circumstance immediately, but it always changes you. And when consciousness is changed, circumstances eventually follow. Let us continue, for now that we understand the role of fear in crisis, we must explore how the voice of God actually reveals itself within consciousness. Let us now consider something that has perplexed spiritual seekers for generations. How does God speak? What does divine guidance actually feel like? For many of you, the reason you believe God is silent is not because spirit has failed to speak, but because you have been looking for the wrong kind of voice. The human mind imagines divine guidance as something dramatic, a flash of light, a thunderous word, a sudden, unmistakable revelation. But the Spirit does not enter consciousness through the theatrical. God is not found in the earthquake, nor in the fire, nor in the mighty wind. The divine guidance that Joel Goldsmith spoke of arises exactly where we least expect it, in the stillness, in the gentleness, in the subtle shift of inner awareness. You may sit in meditation, expecting a message, a sentence, a clear directive, and when none appears, you say, God did not speak. But listen carefully. God rarely speaks in sentences. God reveals himself in silence, and that silence carries its own language. The divine message is not a human word, it is a spiritual impulse. What does that impulse feel like? It may come as a softening of fear, a peace that settles over you like a quiet dawn. It may come as a sense of clarity where confusion once stood. It may come as a calm direction this way, though no words are spoken. Sometimes it arrives as a gentle intuition that seems so natural you almost dismiss it as your own thought, but it is not your thought. It is spirit moving through your consciousness, clothed in the simplicity of your own awareness. Joel Goldsmith used to say, "The activity of the Christ is quiet. It comes without fanfare." And so you must learn to recognize guidance not by its volume, but by its quality. The divine impulse never disturbs, never pressures, never demands. When guidance is from spirit, it carries peace with it. When the human mind tries to guide you, it carries tension, urgency, or fear. The difference is unmistakable once you learn to discern it. Human thought pushes, spirit invites. Human thought argues, spirit reveals. Human thought insists, you must act now. Spirit whispers, rest a moment and let clarity come. Guidance may appear as a quiet sense of well-being about a certain path, even if you cannot explain why. It may appear as a gentle restraint, something within you hesitates, not from fear, but from a quiet knowing that this is not your step to take. It may appear as an idea that arrives fully formed, effortless, as if placed in your awareness from a deeper place than thought. Many of you have experienced this without realizing it. You call it intuition, insight, coincidence, or a feeling I just couldn't shake. But these are merely names we give when we recognize the movement of the infinite without yet acknowledging its source. You see, divine guidance often comes disguised as ordinary thought because the presence expresses through the faculties you already have. It uses your mind, your intuition, your awareness as its instrument. It does not overpower them. It flows through them. This is why so many say they do not hear God. They expect something extraordinary, when in truth, the extraordinary hides itself in the simplicity of your natural awareness. The Christ does not need to shout. The Spirit does not need to break into your consciousness. The infinite whispers because it knows that once your mind grows quiet, the whisper will be enough. And so when you say, God does not guide me, consider this. Perhaps the guidance has come, but it was so gentle, so peaceful, so natural that you dismissed it as nothing. Perhaps the peace you felt was the answer. Perhaps the small inner nudge was the direction. Perhaps the subtle discomfort was the warning. Perhaps the quiet confidence was the affirmation. The Spirit speaks constantly but never loudly. The guidance of God is not a voice. It is an awareness, not an instruction, but a realization, not a command, but a flow. When you begin to trust this gentle movement within, when you honor its quiet authority, you will discover that divine guidance has been present all along, waiting only for your recognition. Now, as we continue, let us explore how this guidance becomes more constant, more natural, and more evident as you learn to live from the practice of the presence. As we move deeper into this work, we begin to understand that divine guidance is not an occasional event. It is not something that happens only in meditation or in times of great need. It is a continuous activity, a perpetual movement of the infinite within consciousness. The question is not whether God is guiding you. God is always guiding. The question is whether your awareness is open enough, quiet enough, receptive enough to notice the guidance that flows like a steady stream beneath the surface of daily life. This brings us to one of Joel Goldsmith's most essential teachings, the practice of the presence. Now, this phrase does not refer to repeating affirmations or reciting sacred words throughout the day. It does not mean manufacturing spiritual feeling or forcing the mind into devotion. No. The practice of the presence is far simpler and far more profound. It is the continuous recognition that the kingdom of God is within you, that the presence is the very life of your being, and that this presence is active, intelligent, and eternally unfolding its perfection. You do not need to reach for God. You do not need to remind God of your needs. You do not need to summon spirit. You need only turn inward again and again to recognize that the divine activity is already present. How do we live in this recognition? Not through discipline, but through remembrance. Not through pressure, but through gentle awareness. Not through constant thinking about God, but through constant listening for God. You begin your morning with the simple realization, the presence goes before me. The presence walks with me. The presence fills my consciousness now, not spoken loudly, not repeated mechanically, but allowed to settle like a soft truth resting over the heart. As you move through your day, whenever disturbances arise, fear, irritation, confusion, you do not fight them. You do not condemn yourself. You simply pause, if only for a moment, and remember, the kingdom is here. The presence is here. Let me be still and listen. This pause may last only a breath, but that breath opens the door of consciousness. In that instant, the mind's momentum slows, the emotional reaction softens, and the quiet movement of spirit becomes perceptible again. Living in constant listening does not mean abandoning your responsibilities or withdrawing from the world. It means carrying the awareness of God within every activity, preparing a meal, speaking with a loved one, engaging in work, facing challenges. You are not trying to bring God into these experiences. You are recognizing that God is already the substance, harmony, and intelligence of every experience. Over time, this gentle practice creates a shift so subtle you may not notice it at first. You begin to respond to life with greater calm. Decisions arise more naturally. You feel less urgency, less fear, less need to control outcomes. You become more patient, more present, more compassionate, not because you try to be, but because the presence within you expresses its own nature through you. As this continues, you discover a remarkable truth. The more often you turn inward, the more often you remember the presence, the more clearly you hear the divine impulse. What once seemed like the occasional whisper becomes a familiar tone. What once felt like rare insight becomes an ongoing flow. What once felt like silence becomes companionship. Joel Goldsmith described this as living in the rhythm of spirit. You are no longer reacting from the personal mind. You are responding from the unfolding of the infinite within you. You are no longer trying to direct your life. You are allowing your life to be directed by the quiet wisdom that arises from the depth of your being. And this, beloved friends, is the beginning of true spiritual freedom. Now that we have explored the ongoing practice of inner listening, let us complete this journey by returning to where we began and dissolving forever the illusion that God is silent. And now, as we come to the close of our time together, let us return quietly to the question that brought us here. Why does God seem silent? Let us look upon that question with the new understanding that is unfolded within us. You have seen that God cannot be silent, because God is not a voice separate from your own being. God is not a distant presence that must travel to reach you. God is not an external power that speaks occasionally, mysteriously, or selectively. No, the divine is the very essence of your consciousness, the life of your life, the awareness in which you live and move and have your being. Silence was never God's doing. Silence was the noise of the personal mind. Silence was the turbulence of fear. Silence was the reaching outward for what can only be found within. Silence was the expectation that God must speak in words. When God speaks in peace, silence was the belief in separation, when separation has never existed. And so, as this understanding dawns, the question dissolves. There is no longer a need to ask, why does God not answer me? For you now see that the presence was answering you long before you learned how to listen. It was answering you in every moment of peace, in every intuition, in every shift of awareness, in every quiet release of fear, in every subtle guidance that you once overlooked. because it did not come in the form you expected. Spirit has always spoken to you, always. It could not be otherwise, for the Spirit of God is forever expressing itself through its own creation. The infinite does not cease to flow. The light does not cease to shine. The presence does not cease to reveal itself. Only the human sense of self, clouded by noise and fear, remained unaware. But now, something within you has awakened. You have touched the stillness. You have tasted receptivity. You have recognized the quiet movement of divine guidance. You have seen that God was never absent, never withholding, never silent. As you go forward from this moment, do not force this understanding. Do not try to hold on to it with effort. Simply remember gently, quietly, that the kingdom of God is within you. In the smallest pause of the day, in the simplest breath of awareness, in the quiet turning of thought toward the presence, you create the openness through which Spirit reveals its unbroken communion. Do not be concerned if the mind becomes noisy again. Do not judge yourself if fear returns. Do not despair if you momentarily forget the presence. For the presence does not forget you. The sun does not cease to shine because a cloud passes before it. The voice does not stop speaking because your mind grows loud. The kingdom does not withdraw because you fail to look within. It waits patiently, tenderly, eternally for your recognition. You are never abandoned. You are never unheard. You are never separated from God. And so, as we bring this teaching to a close, let the final realization rest softly upon your heart. God was never silent. It was only I who had not yet learned how to listen. And now that the listening has begun, your spiritual path will unfold with a new light, a new peace, a new confidence. For you walk no longer toward God, you walk with God, within God, as the expression of God. Rest in that truth. Live from that truth. Let that truth guide every breath, every decision, every moment of your unfolding life. And in the quiet of your own consciousness, you will discover again and again, the presence is here. The voice is speaking, and I am listening.